I've promised people ages ago, but one way or another, with various things getting in the way, I haven't been able to sort of get really focused in on it. But I've just started doing it again. I've nearly finished three of them actually, three of the sort of the original Minds members, because I kind of felt like I wanted to do portraits of all of them,
Hmm.
in my style. So a while back, I don't know if you remember, I put a post out saying that if anybody wanted a portrait, that I'd do it. And funnily enough, I was chatting to Lee briefly on the messenger on N99 earlier, and he showed me something that you did, which I thought was brilliant. I
Okay.
think it was of Lee. It was a portrait of Lee.
Yep.
Thought it was great. Loved it.
Well, I used to
I love the style. It was a bit kind of pop arty in a way. It had that kind of pop arty vibe about it, I thought, when I looked at it.
well, kind of leads on to the question I was going to ask you, Meg. I mean, um, being an artist myself, I never really kind of like doing portraits. It was one of my kind of pet peeves, for a better word, because
Same here. I mean,
I
I'm not. People always go, oh, when you talk. I don't know if you do find this, Tim. When you tell people you're an artist, first, oh, can you do people? Can you do portraits? Can you do animals? And you're like, yeah, I can do them, but I'm not really that interested in doing them at all. It's kind of
it,
like I think a lot of artists that you speak to, they will always say, yeah, I'm not really, it's not really something that I'm that passionate about doing, but I can, some artists might do it as a way of making money because it's something that people always want. They always want portraits of their animals or kids or whatever, don't they?
yeah, but the trouble with doing that, Megan, I was about to say my point being that once you step into that, it's very difficult for the person who's um, asked you to draw their portrait or asked you to do the dog they become almost they want to live their experience through you. So they kind of like they want to watch every stroke, and it's kind of like that's not right, this isn't right, and it's they become
Yeah,
almost controlling, and it kind of like they say to it's just what you just said. I mean, someone obviously goes to an artist because they like their style and what they're trying to do as an individual artist, and then the minute they do that and they find someone, they want to change them all. It's one of those human traits we find all over, not just artists but
yeah,
everywhere. Everybody wants to step in and put their own opinion on it and
yeah.
change
It's
what's
very
actually there.
restrictive, isn't it? The whole doing the portrait art. And I often find it quite strange that a lot of, and don't get me wrong, I think it's amazing that some artists are really into doing this sort of hyper realism type art where they, where a portrait is almost like a photo. And I
Hmm.
find it quite odd in a way because I always want to make it completely, I want more of an unreal look about it, if that makes sense, or some kind of incorporate some kind of surrealism into there, or something that wouldn't be real, if that makes sense. So you could have the portrait of someone, but you could add in some kind of element of non-realistic um, extras, if you know what I mean. You'd sort of add in something that wasn't real, rather than the other way around. Because I mean, all my other art, I like painting things that are totally kind of ethereal or something that isn't associated with this planet, or like I can do landscapes and things like that as well, which is another thing people are quite into. And I find that quite boring to some extent after a while, just sort of doing, like a trees with a waterfall. And I kind of want to add something in that's a bit spacey or a bit, a bit strange, or put some. What I like doing sometimes is creating a something from this planet, like a tree or something, but then adding something that looks like it's nothing to do with planet Earth.
Hmm.
So you add some element in there that isn't anything that we would associate with this planet. So you sort of mix the two things together. That's what I kind of like doing. And so when I sort of said to people at Mind, the ones that were interested, it was really, really good actually, because none of them, kind of opposite to what we were saying, tried to say, well, make sure you paint me in this way, or what you sort of like trying to find out exactly how it was going to be done. And I said, look, I'll incorporate your image, so it will be a likeness to your chosen photograph or whatever it is you want me to copy, or turn into a portrait, but I'll add something in there that you won't be aware of. But I did say to them that I would obviously show them the finished work before I posted it anywhere on any networks, and they were all really cool about that. Everybody seemed quite excited about the prospect of me sort of adding something in there that they weren't really going to be aware of what it was going to be until the end. Some kind of strange element or visionary element that I would add, that I would incorporate with their portraits. So that was kind of the plan originally, that was going to. So yeah, I've just been getting back into it. So, which I love. But the only thing is, I find, and I don't know if you find this, Tim, when I get into the art, it's quite a lone process, a loner process. I can get very into doing the art to the point that I kind of disconnect from anything else that's going on around me. So sometimes I can get so heavily into doing the artwork that I kind of become a bit detached from reality, which isn't always necessarily a good thing when you've got to do kind of earthly tasks. But it's the same as when you do music. I mean, I can't read music, but like you, I play a bit of piano and I can play by ear a little bit. And I don't have a piano at the moment, but when I have had a piano in the past, and it was the same kind of thing. I'd get really into doing my music, and sometimes I'd go on this kind of creative role where I was getting all these ideas, and it was really frustrating because I'd create these musical pieces, but I couldn't actually write any of the music down because I don't know how to write music, in that respect, and I don't know how to, translate it onto a piece of paper. So, say any musician could read the music and then they could just copy it. So, over the years, I've created things and then I've forgotten what I've created. I've been on my own and I've been playing the piano. I'm thinking, oh my God, that's really good. And then a couple of weeks down the line, I get distracted and do something else. And then I suddenly think, God, I created something really amazing and I've totally forgotten what it was now. I can't recreate it. I just know that I created something and then I've forgotten all about it. A bit like when you go to sleep and you wake up in the morning, you've had this epic dream, you remember it up to a certain point and then it just fades gradually through the day and then you can't remember it after that. And I'm sure that this is what I was going to go on to say, that with creativity, it's like when we go to sleep and we have dreams that we can remember, we go into another kind of reality, um, a fourth dimensional reality as opposed to the third dimension, where we can be more creative and we can do more things, kind of like anything goes. We become these manifestors of whatever we want in our dreams. If we have been lucky enough to experience some kind of lucid dreaming experience where that you're
Mhm.
kind of aware of the fact you're dreaming and you can kind of steer the dream how you want it to go, hence you create stuff. I think that's a lot of what it is when you're actually creating in the earthly dimension, the third dimension. Once you go back into the normality of, third density living, you can actually forget what you've created.
Mhm.
The same as you can forget a dream when you wake up in the morning. It fades after about 10 minutes of you being awake, lying in bed and recalling it all. And then by lunchtime, you've forgotten it all. You just know that it was this great dream and you think, God, I should have written the dream down. And I've noticed that if you make a conscious effort to actually write the dreams down that you have,
Yeah.
you can stay within those two sort of realities. So you can remember those dreams for longer. It's kind of like you can train your brain to be part of both those dimensions. And then you can actually, by writing it down, even if you don't look at the book, each time you go to sleep at night, you find that you wake up and you remember the
Mhm.
dreams that you had. Whereas if you don't practice that, you can go to sleep every night and you can dream every night, but you won't always remember them the next day.
Yeah,
So I
completely.
find that there's these little exercises we can do where we can keep ourselves kind of rooted in a balanced way in both those kind of dimensions, if that makes sense. So you can remember things that you wouldn't normally remember. And not only that, you don't forget them. I mean, that's the other thing as well. And it's always been a bit of a question mark. You might be able to answer this question, but I've wondered, I've had dreams in the past that I've never ever forgotten. And then, like I said, I've had these other dreams where I wake up in the morning and I remember them for 10 minutes and then they fade as the day goes by. And I've often wondered to myself, what is the difference? What did I do different? Or what was the different connection that made certain dreams stay in my head? You know, I've had dreams when I was a kid that I can still remember to this day. You know, it's literally just a handful of dreams that I've never ever forgotten, and I can recall them as clearly as the minute I woke up. Yet other dreams, I know that I've woken up, remembered them, and then they faded as the day's gone on. So I've often wondered, and I don't know if you've got any input in that respect, how, you know, why that would be different, because I honestly don't know the answer to that question.
Well, just on a couple of things there, Megan. I think the what you just spoken about that diving between the 4D and 3D or reality, it's and I put this up as a post earlier on in 99, and it says the truth lies between perception of the dreams and the illusion of reality, and that is the Zen path, for want of a better word, that many creative people walk along all the time. And they're, like you said, they're trying to, what you just eloquently described is that walk that you have to do between real life, for want of a better word, and the creative flow. And I think this is one of the, I'm so glad we speak upon this, because I think it's something that I think some of the unspoken elements of being a creative person, that everyone just thinks that they see the output, as we started this conversation on, but they don't understand there is a, it's not just a, um as most people would imagine, it's just that, oh, you just it happens to come across. There's an element of discipline to this, and like you just getting into the element of, like, for instance, Meg, I've kept a dream, for want of a better, dream diary, and I've always had a notepad by my book for over 20 years, and like you said, it starts to become a discipline in itself. You know, it becomes a repeating pattern and stuff like this. And it's not just like all these things that, if you want to become better at anything, you have to put the hours and the practice in and start
Mm.
picking up disciplines. Now, to answer the second part of or the question you asked, and I have had exactly the same experience, and it's something that I can relate to. And I think it's always good at times to sort of speak upon these things and say that, you know, you're not the only one.
Yeah.
I've had that, because I can experience it. Now, my thought process on this, and it's like a lot of, you know, and I've done some, you know, kind of some reading, or, you know, and some research onto, like, for instance, in the same area of why do we keep certain memories? What is it with certain memories that I can remember? The very first kiss I had when I was a 4-year-old, I can remember these things like
Yeah.
vividly. I can remember the smell, everything about it. Now, when I've read into it, and maybe it overlaps into what the question you're asking, is they're saying that obviously it's almost like a recall system in your mind, that you're going to keep going back there. So the pathways that the synapses and it goes
Hmm.
down are obviously stronger because they've been used. It's like a pathway. They've been used over and over again. And you quite like it. Now, why? I mean, that's the next question, begs. Well, why was that so? Why is that pathway so strong? I think that sometimes, and I think what you just mentioned, that whether it's the discipline of actually wanting to lucid dream and actually experience that other consciousness, or whether it's just something you fall into at times and then you just come out of it. And obviously, I think you're just it's like a reboot in your system. You're going to remember those, so they can almost be seared into your memory and your consciousness, even just because of that very reason. Because it's like,
Yeah.
if you're a 5-year-old and you had this really absolute lucid experience, it's going to be seared into your memory. Now, the difficulty is, and that's the thing about us as humans, we can add to it, and before you know it, that's why it's always good to confer things, because you're like, did we actually do that, or you know what I mean? But
Did I
I
dream
think
it? Yeah.
exactly, but
Did I
even
dream that up, or was it actually real?
exactly, but what I'll give you an experience that I've had, and this kind of relates to this. When I spent some years living in Venezuela, and in Venezuela there's the place where Conan Powell wrote the Jurassic Park. Well, that's all came from the Forgotten Land and stuff. When he went down there, and obviously in the 1890s, and he saw this, it was very inspiring for him. But the point being is, there's an area of Venezuela. It's basically It's basically it's where the old Earth would be. Some of the oldest rocks and pieces of Earth, and the rock. It's basically where the continents of Africa and South America, ripped apart, and they've left
Yeah.
these tepuis, which is these flat mountains, which you see in South Africa and in Venezuela, and they're really old, and they've got all these fascinating shapes. So anyway, the experience I want to say, we went out with a group of Pimons, who are the Indians up there, and a group of us, about 7 or 8 of us. We went climbing up the mountain because it's a 3-day trip, and you got it. So on the second day, we all had this absolutely lucid dream, all of us, and were all in it. We all shared it. We all kind of like met each other. It was very. I'm not going to go into the whole dream itself, but even to this day, I know if I pulled that person's onto this screen now, they'd be like, "Yep, we would know every single moment of that dream, how it all related." And if, for all a better word, Meg, and I think this is the power of these things. Is they changed that moment changed. It was a crossroads in my life, and it changed my life forever, because it was like, oh, and there was a certain things that happened in that dream that led me down certain paths that if I hadn't had that experience, I would have never gone down. So I think these are, like you said, there's that fourth dimension and that third dimension, and I think at certain places on the earth, I think that's, like I'm saying, that wasn't any surprise that it happened on one of the, where it was up a Rima, on the oldest piece of rock on the earth. I think there's certain vortexes on this planet, and I also think we can all tap into it. But as you said, I think maybe all of us tap into it all the time, but we're just, I don't know, we just forget it. But then that's the other thing as well, Megan. I think it's one of those things that if you don't have the discipline for it, and then you've also got to remember that, like you said, it's all the scrambling of everyday's life. And then equally, how much do we, as human beings, just destroy our meat machines? We pour alcohol down our throat. We inebriate ourselves with all sorts of substances. And then we wonder why we don't have any lucid dreams and the experiences of the fourth dimension. And our third eye, for what, like Bill Hicks used to say, is completely painted black.
Yeah. And I've got a bit of a theory about the dream world, fourth density, fourth dimension, whatever you want to call it. And I kind of feel like that is the reality. That's the reality place. That is what we call our waking life, the real life. So we go to sleep and it's like, the dream world is the unreal world. I actually think it's the other way around. And I think the reason human beings need to sleep, between 8 and 12 hours, and it's obviously different for children because they're physically growing. But I think it's not just a case of them physically growing. I think their chakras are growing as well, and evolving. So they need more sleep on that basis because they need that longer period of time away from this third density world. So they can, and I think the key is, I think the whole reasoning behind it, unbeknown to most people, is we need to learn how to anchor ourselves into the fourth dimension whilst
Exactly.
existing in the third dimension. So it's kind of like, this whole thing about going to sleep, having dreams, not remembering them, remembering some of them. And like you were saying, you had these memories. You've got certain memories when you were a child, or other, you recall other past memories. And you sort of think to yourself, why is it that I remember that particular thing, but I don't obviously remember other, your parents could tell you something that you did when you were a child at the age of 6, and you'd have no recollection of it. You go, I can't remember
Mm-hmm.
doing that. And they're going, oh yeah, you did, whatever it was. It might be something funny that you did,
Mm-hmm.
and you've got no recollection, yet you've got this recollection of this particular time when you were 4 years old and having this kiss. And I think the key difference would have been, there would have been some kind of something that It could have been a specific smell, or the way somebody touched your shoulder at the same time as them giving you that kiss. And what that did is it anchored it into your brain to the point that you never forgot. And this is kind of how people have habitual scenarios that occur in their life, which could be a good thing, or it could be a very detrimental, bad thing. That something, you know, on the negative, it could be something that they don't want to do in their life, like some kind of habit they've got, or repeat patterns in their life that they don't want to keep repeating. And it's due to the fact that in the subconscious mind, there is a program that was created at a certain point, which, you know, the person won't necessarily be aware of when it was created. Some people might have some awareness if they've gone through life having these repeat patterns, and then they've gone through some kind of therapy, you know, some kind of extensive therapy to try and break out of this unhealthy patterns that keep reoccurring. And so they might dig deeper into their past, so they might have some idea as to why they do these things, but most people don't really know why it happens. All they know is that in their conscious mind they don't want whatever this thing is, yet it keeps repeating in their life. I mean, it could be a repeating of toxic relationships or friendships, or not ever having the right kind of job or the right kind of career, or, you know, and it just keeps repeating over and over again. And at some point they've anchored in a program in the subconscious, and at no point have they given the subconscious a command to say, I no longer want to run that program, or I want to eradicate that program with this new program. Because that's partly one of the best ways to heal that recurrence of something you don't want. If you understand how it works, you know, like you've got the conscious mind, which is like the captain of the ship, you know, if you like, and then you've got the subconscious mind, which are like the crew, and they just basically follow commands from the conscious mind. So whatever the conscious mind commands the subconscious to do, it does it without question, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. It doesn't understand, I do not want whatever. It just hears the bit at the end. You know, it's ambiguous. They don't sort of hear the bit about, I don't want this. It just hears it as a command. You know, like if you said to your child, you pull into a petrol station to get petrol, and you said to your child, right, do not undo the seatbelt, then the subconscious mind could actually hear that as undo the seatbelt. It doesn't hear that I do not want bit. But like a lot of things, and it's the whole thing about what's going on in the world, these, you know, people keep saying, well, what can we do to change all this stuff that's going on? The only way you can change it is by creating something new, which then renders the old thing obsolete, so it becomes non-existent. And it's the same with how we program our brains. If we give our subconscious a new set of commands, or we input new data into the subconscious, eventually it will override the current data that's being stored in the brain. So you create a new program, and then that creates a new kind of motherboard within the brain, if you know, within the human biocomputer. And then all these different circuit, and then there's a whole new direction of circuitry that happens within the brain. And then as a result of that, our realities then reflect the programming in the subconscious. So if you programmed your brain to believe that it was a multi-millionaire, or believe a physical change, it could be that you've got brown eyes but you want blue eyes. So if you programmed your brain, your subconscious mind, and said you've got blue eyes, eventually your eyes would turn blue. Your physical body would change, which is, I mean, that's another, we could talk about that probably on another show, but that's called biokinesis. You know, it's basically reprogramming the DNA, changing the DNA to something else. So whatever the current DNA is telling your body to be, to become, or whatever it is, you can change that with biokinesis, which is basically the same thing as what I'm talking about. You change what's in the subconscious brain. So this is why people have these repeat patterns in their life,
Yeah.
which you get people that we call lucky, or that people that have the Midas touch, and they seem to have these amazing lives, like they're sort of super lucky. Everything goes their way, nothing ever goes wrong. And a lot of these people some people are consciously aware of shaping their lives in that way. They don't necessarily have had to have gone on any courses to gain a greater understanding of how the human brain works. But some people just have a positive mindset, which probably goes back to their childhood somewhere along the line, where probably in their formative years, from when they were sort of ages 2 to 7, whatever happened in that time, their programming was that they had a strong positive belief system, as part of their programming,
Hmm.
which was it may be some partly due to genes and lineage, and also to sort of nurture, depending on who their role models and the most influential people were in their lives at that time. So they grow up with this very positive program in their subconscious, and that's why their lives just seem to go perfectly. They attract the perfect romantic partners, they have these brilliant jobs, careers, everything in their life just seems to be perfect. And people look upon those people and think, God, they're so lucky, those jammy bastards, they just everything goes their way, it's perfect. Not realizing that they can be like that as well. I think some people are just naturally, yeah, they have a naturally positive mindset, which has been cultivated from a young age. So I suppose you could say that was a luck element, if they had a good family life. And but yeah, it's a case of kind of knowing how to sort of reprogram your brain. And this is where, a lot of these things that get kind of looked upon as a bit new age, like the
Hmm.
whole thing about affirmations. Well, saying an affirmation every day, or a series of affirmations, is actually very beneficial, because that's part of the programming process. You could literally if and this is what you were saying earlier, Tim, about needing to have some kind of discipline. um all these things that we're talking about, some people would view them as kind of frivolous, and, oh yeah, you're hippies and creative hippies and whatever. But actually, all this requires a lot of discipline.
Hmm.
So if you want to change your mindset and you want to change your life, because you're not happy about the way your life's being, currently, then you need to have discipline. So you might need to say to yourself, right, every day for an hour, I'm going to meditate, and I'm going to input this positive data into my brain.
Yeah.
And that would be a discipline, you know, the meditation. And I think this is where the creativity comes in, which I think is brilliant, which, like, I know we've spoken about this before, Tim, how a lot of people say they're not creative and they can't do art and they can't do anything. But it's a case of just getting yourself into some kind of meditative
Hmm.
mode. And I think this is where the artwork or the creativity or the music, or it could be cooking, or for some people, it could be knitting, it could be doing some kind of cross stitch, it could be doing gardening, something that could be listening to certain types of music. It just gets people into a certain mindset. It creates a different vibrational field around them, and then as a result of that, they feel different. It raises
It,
certain music raises the vibration within you. It changes things, because obviously frequencies affect. what we consider to be something that's solid, that's matter. So the frequency of music will change the way you feel because it changes you physiologically as well. Because obviously your body's made of water and it affects, you know, through the vibrations of that particular music, it affects the way you feel. So if people feel very negative or depressed and they just say, well, I can't get motivated to do anything, it's a vicious cycle because I feel depressed about my life because it's shit. So then I don't want to do anything because I feel so bad. Then what they can do, which is a really simple thing, is to listen to some music. It sounds really like, is that, you know, that doesn't sound very exciting. You know, if you went to see a therapist, you'd expect them to come out with some really elaborate plan, but it actually isn't that elaborate. It's just something very simple to change your current state. You know, if your current state is feeling depressed, if you listen to some music that you really like, it will immediately raise your vibration up to a slightly more improved feelings. It might not cure all your depression, but it might just make you feel better, and then you feel like you're in a better state of mind to start writing or to get into doing some meditation. It might give you more motivation. Like certain music motivates you to do things. This is why people put music on to work out. You know, if they're doing exercise, they have certain types of music that get them into that mode, whereas before they felt all sluggish. So
Mm-hmm.
it's just finding the thing that elevates that state of consciousness up to a higher level, a higher vibratory level. And then things become a lot easier to do. And, you know, everything looks different when you're feeling in a better emotional state, doesn't it? All the things that exist within somebody's life that aren't particularly positive, they all seem a lot easier to deal with when you're in a better mindset.
Yeah,
So if you can find ways to elevate that state of consciousness, and everybody's got a different, it's a case, sometimes it's a case of finding the thing that is most pleasurable to you. So probably in our case, it would be doing artwork and listening to music combined, or other people, it would be just going for a nice walk somewhere that, you know, looking at nice trees and plants and things like that. Um, it's just a case of finding the thing that gives you the most joy,
yeah,
happiness, that instantly triggers that feeling within you and changes the vibration around you, or within you rather.
exactly, Megan. I think it's always worth reiterating that um, any of the paths you choose are free. This is the element of, I think really needs to be sort of spoken over and over again. That especially we live in a world we live in, the part of the world society we live in, where there's so many snake oil salesmen and they're selling you products and they're selling you this, and it's all just a scam. Just to basically, the truth is you can do everything yourself for free, and I think that's really worth reiterating and recalling and remembering, because like you say, I think, like you say, whether it's just going for a walk, and I think the other element that has always been, I don't know, for want of a better word, a principle of mine, Megan, it's always been kind of, like I say, I've had it ever since I was been on this planet. I thought, anytime, and I can, I can understand, what it's like to go ups and downs, and I think, like you said, all the very past you said about putting things on paper and just getting them out. We've spoken upon that before, but I think the other one as well. I think people, particularly, and it doesn't matter again. And I've been fortunate enough to be around the world and see things and stuff. And I think it relates to what you said earlier on. I think people at times, they can look at people and, like you said, and say, "Oh, aren't they fortunate?" and stuff like that. And again, it's only perception. And I think one of the things, particularly, and I think that's maybe is a bit of a duality to this whole almost thought process of what particularly is sort of pushed around this whole concept in this conversation, is that, well, a lot of this is struggle. I mean, I always recall that, the fact, the story of the Buddha himself, who was brought up in a very palatial, had everything he wanted from a child, and and then one day asked us to leave the walls, and he didn't understand what illness was. He didn't understand, and that was his whole path from that moment onwards. And I relate that to this conversation, Meg, because I think, and it's always been something I've spent many years contemplating and going around my head, and I haven't got a clear answer to this yet. But it's one of the reflections I've seen, that when the more I spent time, particularly in people like I say in Venezuela, or people live more in touch with, for want of a better word, with nature, more having to deal with the harshness and that reality of what that's like, of having, just being at the mercy of nature itself. You don't get the mental illness problems for what we call over here that they do. You don't have all the issues that we have here. You don't have screaming kids screaming about transgender toilets, and that doesn't exist in those parts of the world. And I think a lot of it relates to everything you just said, because they have a different viewpoint of what their dreams are about. They have a different viewpoint about everything else. And I think the element that always, I don't know, I think it's always a good one to sort of, I think, bear in mind to people, that if you ever do feel, and this is the element that's almost been forgotten, and I think needs to be sort of spoken upon, that you can always just go out and find somebody. One of the best things to make you feel, and I don't care who you are, because I think it is written into us as DNA, as us as human beings. I'm not hashtag not all human beings, because we know that, but just the generalization that if you're feeling low about yourself, and you're feeling down about yourself, and you're feeling anytime you're feeling like you're saying that in that groove of doubt, that negative groove, just take a walk and go and talk to somebody. Go and find somebody who's in a less fortunate position than yourself. It was one of the things, and I don't mean going around, putting the t-shirt on, letting everybody, and say, look, I'm running 10K for, and showing it off to everybody. I mean, just go down to the nearest old person, knock on their door and ask them how they're doing. Go to the nearest food shelter, go and help them out. Go to the nearest homeless shelter. Just reach out, because it's intrinsic in all of us human beings. If we reach out to other human beings, we, as selfish as we are, which it makes us feel good, and it changes that mindset, because you understand, it kicks in the endorphins, and all the positive things that you spoke upon can be gained just by being human, just by reaching out, just by touching. And that's something, as you said, Meg, it's something that people look at us and say, oh, you're all hippy dippy, and you're all lovey, peace, love, and well, okay, well, aren't we all peace, love? I mean, who doesn't want peace and love? I mean, really, I don't think the majority of people on this planet are around screaming for war and hate. I don't.
Yeah.
But the point I'm trying to make is, Meg, that these people, like you said, that when they judge you like that, they don't understand that all these elements, it's the same reason that why people have the same viewpoint of all the religions around the world. And it's like, if you go to some of the oldest religions, like the Jains and the Buddhists and the Hindus, and they're just like, a lot of their life is just spent in a disciplined state, whether it's yoga. Then they start talking about the food they eat and how they interact with people. And like you said, people on the outside just go, "Oh, it's just some sort of," and you think, no, why are these people doing it? And when you talk to these people, and I think anybody would realize this, that it's one of those almost truths of life. I've yet to not find the truth. The poorer someone is in a monetary state, as in they, from somebody's point of view, they haven't got all the wealth and the riches, and they haven't got the holidays and all that. But the more people have less materially, on a generalization, they become more and more open and friendly and stuff like that, and they become, because they're more in touch. And this is something we've all kind of been lost in this. We haven't helped to, Meg. We've all been programmed. We've all been programmed into consume. We're all been consumed. This whole element of the hive is better than the one. Look what's going on right now in America. The flag is better than the individual. This is all programming. But as you said, Meg, and this is what I think it relates. I'm going to loop it right back to that fourth density state, as you said, is that every human being, like you said, this what we're having right now is just one reality, and deep within us all is that consciousness that we all know that has that humanity, and the struggle that people are always on that path of This is what I'm saying, is it can be broken just by doing the simple things, taking a walk, taking the things out unusual. Like, it's not only the things that give you pleasure, Meg. Sometimes I think it's sometimes facing some of the fears. That's why I know people who climb mountains or will go, and I'm not saying everyone, you know, like I say, everyone have their own different things, but I think at the times, because one of the debilitating things that cripple so many humans, and I've seen friends of mine, you know, now under the ground, 6 foot under, just destroyed by it, is their fear. They fear that they have programmed fear into what they get in everything around them. Then they have just, you know, all these laws and all the fear of just being, you know, put in a cage, or just general fear, and then they maybe this is the other element, Meg. There's so many people who maybe do understand that, know all that, but they're fearful of becoming that because of, you just said, they're fearful of, like, oh, you're just going to be a flaky dippy hippie, or they're fearful, they become fearful of themselves, and they feel like, oh, if I do that, then means me giving up my job, and means me giving up this, and means me doing this, and all that fear breaks in, and this is where the element, and I think it's always really important. That's why I think it's I say it over and again. That's why I love all the things that we're involved in. I love the Imaginarium. I love what we do with this podcast. I love what you do. I love what Minds does. I love what anyone that basically can send any kind of signal out to people to inspire them is only a great thing. Because if people see people go, they're going, oh, wait a minute, I can do that. And it goes back to, and I'll finish on this. It was one of the great. I was, you know, again, when I was in Venezuela, and I lived in the tribe, but then, and I had a chat with this old chap, and we talked about, you know, the difference between Western society and his society, and how they lived and how we lived and all the rest of it. And he said to me, if you ever go back to the West, he said, the one thing you want to tell people is just basically just tell them to stand up and be real and be open, as you know. And he said to me, he said, it was like, he said, all it is like, he said, the West was like, you've got all the knowledge, all the technology, all these things, but you're just like automatons. You're just bouncing along, just doing, like you said, on that grind. You're just having to just walk between two realities. And he said, all you need is one person to go in there with his light switched on, and then touch someone, and then they will light up, and then they will light up. And he said, that's how nature works. And I've always thought that is it's as simple as that. And that's why, like I say, platforms like Minds and what we're doing, and, you know, podcasts, and anywhere can get people that they're inspired to do something, which leads back to creativity, because creativity goes right back to what I said, is free. I mean, you can, you know, humans themselves from the very day have had, you know, whatever it is, have found a bit of mud, a red rock, and spat some, you know, on their hands and done a handprint. That we can all do this. And like you said, these are the first steps towards this breaking the fear, because it's not, the fear is only, which is the other element that, you know, I would love to have a conversation in itself. The fear, the fear that people project, and it all is just projections. It goes back to the whole thing, as I always said, you are the brains of the central nervous system, and you do fear. It goes back to, I'll finish on this analogy, Meg, that whole thing about the body and stuff. I had a experience once where I was in just foolish. I went diving into a I was in the ocean, and I saw kind of whirlpool vortex. Me and my friend, we thought, oh, let's be, you know, and we dived into it anyway. Stupid. I've cut a long story short. I got caught in this vortex like a plug, and I got sucked there, and then got hit by a wave. Anyway, the point being, or the very long, I'm not going to go into the whole story, but the point being, I got to a point being underwater for that long, and it was like I could have swam. The whole ocean opened up to me. I could see fish and everything, and it was like I just realized, like, whoa, this whole, even us breathing underwater is just an illusion. There's so much of us, we have constructed that fear. We've constructed all these things around us only by our own constructs.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's the thing, is that all, you know, I always say to people, you know, at the end of the day, when somebody's like about to take their final breaths and they're going to leave this world, do they, what's important to them at that moment in time? Or what would be important to them at that moment in time? Would it be being like a multi-millionaire, having some really posh car and house, and impressing all their friends because, they've got some kind of social status because of the amount of money that they earn each year or the type of house they live in. At the end of the day, when they're actually about to die, what would be most important to them? And I think nearly everybody would say, that they have people that love them, or that they loved other people, or that they had good people in their lives, or that at that moment when they're going to die, that they have people that love them around them. I don't think any of those other things, the material things, would really matter at that point. Um, and this is the thing that we've got to ask ourselves when we're going through life: what are we trying to achieve, and why are we trying to achieve it? That's those, to me, those are the two. Some of the key, well, some of there's other questions that you could ask, but those are two kind of key questions you could ask yourself when you're striving to do something or achieve something. You have to ask yourself the question: why am I doing this? Expect to get out of it at the end, and if that's what I want to get out of it, why do I want that? People have to sort of ask themselves these difficult questions, because quite often people go through life striving for something or trying to achieve something, but they've never really asked the question why they're doing it. Because there's always a reason for why anybody does anything. And the strange thing is, you could take a handful of people all striving for the same thing, but if you got those people to ask themselves those questions, they probably all have slightly different answers as to why they were trying to get it. Somebody might be trying to get some kind of accumulate some kind of wealth because they want to impress their friends, but another person might be trying to accumulate wealth because they want to help other people who are less fortunate than themselves. So, using money as an example of what I'm trying to talk about, people always say that money is you know, the root of all evil, but I always say that it's actually greed that is the root of all evil, because money can potentially do very good things. If it's in the right hands of the right people, then they can actually do a lot of good with money. I'd like to see a time when we get to a point in humanity where we don't need money, but while we still have that thing with that whole thing with the currency, the whole exchange of, you do this for me and then I'll pay you in some form of money, whatever that is. We've got other forms of money now, like cryptocurrency and all the rest of it. But until that completely goes out of society, it's still there in existence. There are people that could do a lot of good, with money. They could achieve a lot and do very positive things for humanity. So I don't necessarily think that money is the root of all evil. I think that greed is, or the reasons why somebody wants to accumulate a lot of money. But this is the thing: aside from all of that, people go through life struggling, trying to achieve things and obtain things, and instead of just focusing on the small things, like take a sort of a stereotypical family, um, say with traditional roles. So the father's sort of working his ass off to make money or to try and make sure that they go on a really nice holiday every year and they do all this stuff. But while he's intently focused on that, he's probably not really watching his children grow up and like noticing the funny little things about their personalities. Or, when he's working in his study and one of his children come in and they sort of show him a picture or they try and talk to him, he's probably going, oh, no, no, off you go. I'm busy. I'm trying to do such and such. Um, and the irony is he's busy because he wants to give good things to his family, when in actual fact, all his children probably wouldn't care about whether they went on a really expensive holiday every year or if their house was amazing. They're just going to remember the interaction that they had with their father, or whether he showed any interest in what they were doing at the time, rather than being too busy to notice, the little things that were going on. So I kind of think that's the sad thing, that a lot of people, spend their whole lives trying to achieve something for the benefit of their families, but while they're doing that, they're missing out on all this other stuff that is much more valuable, precious, but they're not observing it, they're missing it all. because they're kind of, tunnel vision on achieving something. So that's what I would always say is, what it doesn't just have to be monetary or a monetary related thing. It can be anything. Always ask yourself the question why you're doing something.
Mm-hmm.
It's always wise, I think, to know exactly why you're doing something.
Mm-hmm.
The reason behind it. Sometimes you can just do something like listen to a bit of music because it makes you feel happy. And I'm not saying that you should analyze every little detail, like why am I eating this food, but if you're going to embark on a really epic project or something that's going to be life changing,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it's worth going in a bit deeper and sort of thinking, well, why am I doing it? Because a lot of people do things and they struggle and cause themselves a lot of stress. And the reality is, when they actually delve a bit deeper, it's not necessarily the thing that they wanted. It was something else that they wanted. But they kind of thought mistakenly that they had to do X, Y, and Z to get the thing that they wanted. Had they just kind of got themselves into a bit of a meditation and sort of looked at it calmly and thought, well, actually, do I really need to do that? Is that what I really want? I don't know if any of that makes sense, but I just kind of feel that people need to question themselves more, you know.
I go back to principles, Megan. It's one of the I think one of the main principles that have always driven me from my life is to question everything, and that begins. And I think the fundamentals of what you just spoke upon then is you start with questioning yourself. You question why you're thinking things. Why am I doing this? And if you have that mentality, it really. This is the thing, Megan. I think it's. This is my reflection on this stuff. I think it can be made to sound really, really complicated, and it can be made to sound. And I think honestly, if I'm going to be, we're going to have a real conversation here. I think there's two. That goes back to what I said earlier on. We live in a world where there's snake oils, sales oilsmen, and they're going out to sell bits and pieces for their own reason. And we could discuss about the human traits of human beings, but take for example, it's not uncommon for whatever ideology it may be, that the person who's sitting there at the top of the tree is the person who has, fulfilling his desires. And it's usually a male, like I say, and he's usually, fulfilling his sexual desires and stuff. This is a common thing that goes on and on and on because because it's almost, we've been, people these people have an intrinsic need to say to people, oh, it's a really hard path and you've got to do this and come along and join our sect, join our ideology and follow this step and this step and this step. And people are hungry for it because people, as you said, Meg, I think you've been eruditely spoken upon, people are hungry to know themselves. They know it themselves and they feel that disconnect. They feel like this isn't what I'm about. Always give a perfect example, which I think always, you bring into real life. You'll know, I know, people all around you, and they will. It won't be till like their wife dies or their brother dies or they have an accident themselves or something, and they're like, "Whoa, what was I doing? Why was I working in the 9 to 5?" So everybody knows that. So it's that, and everybody says that. They say that. What would you want on your dying death? You want someone. You want your family. You want someone around you who loves you, whatever it may be. Now these things are known, but like I say, the people that the solutions or the hidden, not the hidden, the stuff that's been made hidden, it's been made hidden by people who basically say it's got to be hard and all this. Very long-winded way I'm getting across here, Meg, is this is all very, I think, intrinsic to us. I don't think any of this is hard. I think it's all very much in us. And I think a lot of the trips or the things that where people, like you say, where they don't know what they're doing and they don't know, is because they're not, like I say, questioning themselves, and then they start to doubt themselves, and they start to question themselves, and they start to have, and in comes the inconsistencies in their thought process, and they start to, and then resistance builds up, and before you know it, they're back to a stationary, just state of mindset. Now, like all these things, as we've come to say, are very easy to do, and I think a lot of this, as you say, Meg, and I think it's it's what you don't do. I think a lot of it, and this is the whole thing. It's what you don't do. You know, it's. I think this always has to be related, especially when we we have to be real in this conversation. There are people in this world right now. I have friends who are living in Venezuela and stuff, and they don't have the literal freedoms we have right now. You know, some people don't have the opportunities, and you know, for whatever reason. But for those who are, and all of us have the ability, we can just, like I said, like you were speaking upon, which I would totally concur with. We have the decision. Nobody's forcing us to put rubbish down our throats. Nobody's forcing us to pour liquid and sugars down our throat. Nobody's forcing us to do this. It's all choice, and it becomes like a habit, as you were speaking on. It all becomes just habits, and these habits can lead people to dark places, and it becomes the habit becomes more overriding than the consciousness itself. It's, for want of a better word, all religions have talked about, it's the demons, and they're everywhere. And the demons aren't there to, you know, out of fearful, not chasing you through the woods trying to. They're the ones that seduce you in every of your desires, and you fall into that. So, you know, obviously, it's, Meg, you've got children. You know, it's like, you know, just because you can, it's like with your children. You say to them, just because you can doesn't mean you should. You know, we're like, and it almost as always through our lives. You know, I could sit here tonight, pour loads of sugar down my throat, go out, just drink, you know, swallow a bottle of whiskey. I could do that night after night after night after night until I die. That's my decision. But then you can't get to the end of my life and say, well, okay, what happened? And these are the things. It's not a hard path. It's just more of a path of not. It's the not doing. It's one of the elements of particularly Buddhism I love particularly. It's the not doing, the inaction, the don't, you know, what you don't do rather than what you do. And I think that's all. It blends into that whole thought process, which is, you know, again, it's another principle. Be kind, and I think that's another principle that's kind of forgotten and lost in this world, because that stems from that whole element of just be kind to people, be kind in your words, be kind in everything else, and then you're not doing. By being kind, you're not giving out anger, you're not giving out those things, and it's you
So you're
find that
changing the vibration of those things just by
exactly,
default, just by being those things.
exactly.
See, a lot of people spend, you know, this is part of the programming for, you know, the minute we come out of the womb, is that we are programmed to believe that we're very small, that we can't actually do anything, that we need leaders telling us what to do, that we need, you know, we not only do we need leaders on the actual earth plane, you know, physical entities, but we need, you know, gods that we have to, you know, follow these religious doctrines and all the rest of it. And so we're programmed to believe that things, that we have to work hard. You know, the minute we go into the institution of school, it's like, well, you have to work hard, otherwise you'll amount to nothing, you'll achieve nothing. So people are of this mindset that things can't possibly be that easy. It can't possibly be. So people give away all their power, which is actually like a form of laziness, and say, well, I can't change anything, I can't do anything, I haven't got any power, so I'm going to give away all my power to these handful of people that repeatedly, you know, do destructive things to the planet over and over again. But because there's no other better option, it's what we've always done. We've always voted for this handful of people that repeatedly lie, and they don't actually carry out any of the things they say they're going to do. Even though we know they lie and everything, and we see it happening all the time, we're still going to just give away all our power because it's what we've always done, and we can't do anything else. And in the same vein, you get people that are these sort of obsessive planners. They spend ages planning to do something, you know, anally retentively working out every fine detail of how they're going to carry out a task or operational of some sort, because they fear failure. They fear failure, so they think, well, I've got to put all this planning in because I can't possibly fail. If I put all this planning and structure in, then I'm not going to fail. And don't get me wrong, I don't think that it's a bad thing necessarily to plan something or to put some kind of structure in place, you know, so something goes smoothly. But what I'm saying is there's people who are so obsessed in that direction of things that they actually fail to do anything. Rather than just saying, well, actually, instead of putting all this anal retentive planning, just try it. Just do it and see what happens. Because you'll learn more from the pitfalls of actually doing something. It's like me and Satori always have this chat because I get quite worried about doing some of the technical stuff. And he's like, oh, no, just do it. If you do it a few times, then you'll understand it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, oh, God. And even I fall foul to it. I'm thinking, oh, yeah, but what if it goes wrong? Oh, God, it's going to be really embarrassing. He's like, yeah, but so what? Who cares? You know, if it goes wrong, then you'll understand. You learn more from actually actively doing something and eradicating the fear, or somehow allowing yourself to get over the fear or the concern of like, what if it goes wrong? And just saying to yourself, well, it's okay if it goes wrong. If it goes wrong, so what? Well, it's like I've been doing artwork and I I rarely plan things. I kind of like things to evolve. But there's been a couple of occasions where I've kind of planned something. I thought I want it to look in a certain way, or I've used certain, colours in a certain way, that a way I've wanted to blend them in. And then I've made a massive mistake. And in the past, I used to be like, oh my God, I can't believe it. I've just spent hours doing such and such and I've just ruined it. But now I don't care if
Mm-hmm.
I even slightly plan something and then it goes
Mm-hmm.
wrong. Because I kind of think, well, it's like, what did Bob Ross say? That artist, he said, happy little mistakes or
Mistakes.
happy
Yeah.
little accidents. That's it,
Yeah.
happy little accidents. That's all they are. They're happy little
Yeah.
accidents, which you can just improvise. Then you think, well, it's supposed to happen. It was supposed to happen that way. I can now capitalize on it.
Mm-hmm.
So whatever happens, there is no failure. There's no such thing as failure. It's all part of the learning process. But it's because a lot of people have been programmed to believe that they've got to do things in a certain way, and if they don't get it right by a certain time or a certain point, then they're basically deemed to be a failure. But that's what society's done. That's how it's been. It's been purposely structured that way because they don't want people tapping into their higher selves, and actually being able to sort of fully use the power that they have to sort of create and shape their own lives.
Oh,
That
completely.
they just want the yes men and the yes women. They just want people running the system. So this is why in schools everything is rewarded based on
Mm-hmm.
left brain activity, which is totally linear, because everything in society that all the systems that need to be run are all based on left brain activity. And of course, if you're not in touch with your right brain, then you're not in touch with your higher self, or the higher levels of consciousness, which is about creating your own reality, and understanding how everything works. If you're totally in touch with left brain reality and you've totally closed off the right brain, or being able to tune into the right brain, then you can be intelligent enough to run the systems. I think George Carlin, that American comedian, said
Mm-hmm.
something along these lines, that they just want to breed, society is just breeding people to be intelligent enough to run the systems and, do the things that the elites want us to do that benefit them. But they're sort of dumbed down enough not to question anything. They don't question anything outside of themselves, let alone actually question themselves, like we've been talking about. So that's what they want, and this is why the creative people don't really get rewarded in school. It's only the left brain people that get rewarded, because that's what they want. They want people to be predominantly left brain. I mean, you need the left brain as much as you need the right brain. There needs to be a balance. You need all those systems in the human brain working like clockwork. You don't want to shut off any of those parts of the brain, but you don't want to be predominantly too right hemisphere or too left hemisphere. But yes, they just want society to be all left brain, with no right hemisphere functioning at all. And it's not just about the programming through the institutions, all the foods that they kind of that we buy from the supermarkets, and the pharmaceuticals, medicines and stuff that we take, and that all affects the brain in a very detrimental way and shuts down that that creative side, which is our link to the higher self or to the higher dimensions. And it's also what connects humans together. I think that's why, quite often a traumatic experience will often trigger
Mm.
somebody to go very much into the right hemisphere of the brain. Emotion of any kind will change will change a state of consciousness very rapidly, which is why a lot of people that go through a bereavement, even if they were never spiritual or, like we were saying, hippie and creative before, they suddenly go through these periods of being very
Mm-hmm.
emotional and very in touch with, you know, creativity elements of themselves that they've never tapped into before, and suddenly start having all these really vivid dreams, and quite often it will freak them out. So sometimes they'll hallucinate and they'll see things, and they'll have all these weird psychic experiences that they've never had before after they've had a bereavement. And they'll often go to the doctor, and the doctor will just say, oh, yeah, that's quite common. It's because you're depressed. We need to give you some drugs to shut down the right hemisphere of the brain again. So they take drugs, and it shuts it all down. The same as a lot of people that go through some kind of a awakening process. They will often think they're going mad because they'll start seeing and hearing things, or tuning into things that they didn't really tune into before, or they'll start seeing the connection of everything. They'll start connecting things up. That they'll become aware of synchronicity. In that
Mm-hmm.
it's not just a coincidence. There's no such thing as coincidence. They'll start to see that the synchronicities in their life are speeding up, and some people can't take it. If they go through like an awakening process and they start to become aware of all these synchronicities, because they enter into a higher state of consciousness, they think they're going mad. So they go to the doctor. The doctor says that they're depressed and gives them some kind of drug to dumb them down again. And they're like, yeah, I feel much better now because
Mm-hmm.
I'm out of touch with my emotions. So that's another thing I often say to people, is that with depression and stuff, depression isn't necessarily a bad thing. I don't see it as a bad thing that needs to be medicated, because I think depression is an opportunity for people to become introspective and go more inside of themselves and start looking at themselves in a much more intricate way, which a lot of people will struggle to do that. A lot of people that well, it's like in the Great Depression, a lot of these people, they lost everything. They couldn't handle it, because losing all their material wealth almost like overnight, literally. So one minute they're like multimillionaire, the next minute they're completely destitute. That's the same as losing their identity, because obviously all those material things were what gave them an identity. So they were suddenly stripped of their identity, which means they then had to look at themselves sort of head on in the mirror, and they just weren't ready for it. So a lot of those people, destroyed themselves because they couldn't handle that. They couldn't handle the whole stripping down of their identity, literally to the bare bones. And then they have to look at who they are. They really have to look at what sort of person they are. And I think a lot of people don't like what they see when they look in the mirror. And sadly, some people, they're not ready for it. They can't handle it. But that's kind of what depression is. It's having to look at yourself, you know, and sometimes the things that people see aren't necessarily what they want to see. But if people had the bravery to go through it, the courage to push through the pain barrier, you know, they'd come out of it a lot better, I think, if they didn't medicate themselves and all the rest of it.
No, you're right, Megan. It goes. Let's take this right back to where you started that conversation with. It, you know, you were saying like, and I've had exactly the same experience with. I think all art really starts with you looking at something blank. Let's take the stereotypical blank sheet of paper, and out of that, you've got to form something. Now, I think it's fascinating you mentioned this because I think it relates to both elements. And let's keep this just around the the art of actually creating a piece of artwork with a pen or a paper or anything. To do anything, like you said, you've got to start learning and making mistakes, because that's all the step by step process of learning, as you were saying quite eloquently with what you and Satori was saying, and about you do it, you're going to fall on your knees. That's any process. But how quick you pick it up or how slow you pick it up, that's on yourself. But you start to get these skills and tools in your hands, and you start to flow better. And then you get to a certain point after whatever it is, and you feel comfortable enough that you can go and swim in the murky waters and go out and prod at the void with a stick. And you think, okay, I kind of know what, like you said, it's that answering that question of like, I know what I want. I know what it is inside me. How it's going to be formed, what it's going to turn that out to, who knows? Meg, it's one of the reasons why I've always, it wasn't any accident. I call it seed. I think the idea of I love that analogy, like nature itself. You see this tiny little seed, and all the various ways that nature has it of making that seed come into existence, and then again the process of that seed. What it needs is a bit of dirt, bit of water, and it will transform into something else. Now, when you look at the seed, you would have no idea, or maybe if you were a bit of a seed expert, you go, okay, that's an apple, or that's a pear, but we can generally groups of seeds, but what comes out of that seed will always be individual to every single. That's nature itself. It is diverse. Not every single tree is exactly the same. Not every tomato is exactly the same. And if it was all exactly the same, then you start to worry. But the point of all this is when you do go into something, like you say, when you're creating something and you understand something, you got to that point. Okay, I'm going to swim into those murky waters, and you have an idea. You'll find that things through all the process, you'll still have the same, ups and downs, but what will be formed at the end of it may have nothing what you kind of saw at the beginning, but you kind of know it was going to happen. And this is the other element of it all. And I think this is really kind of, for want of a better word, would be deemed as being open-minded. I think for want of a better word, but in essence, we're just radars. And I was having this very discussion the other day with Lee, and we were discussing about how much of humanity has been held back by individuals holding who can piss the furthest in the wind contests. So we had electricity, and all it was about was putting a name and a signature to it, and I want to own it all, and X, Y, and Z. So and I was thinking like, the reflection to that compared to say like someone like James Watt, who sat in his little, just a few miles away from I am right now, did that, invented this, all for himself, just sat in his room, like you're saying, had no desire for money, had no desire for fame, had no desire for anything else. Even when he did paint it wasn't to make the money out and take the cut from it. It was like, okay, this is the element of what I think, I don't know, Megan, I think it really plays into what you're saying is, maybe in our lifetimes we'll get beyond this thing called money. I think it's been a very good element that we, for whatever it is, because if you looked at it from an alien point of view and went, okay, so you've dealt whatever it is, this thing called money, however you express itself, has given you all ability to just elevate and do things to humans. It was a great concept of what we came around with. And maybe, like you say, maybe in our lifetimes, or maybe it be many generations after we die, that the whole concept of money will disappear. But the thing that goes beyond all this, Megan, I think this is one of the things, that reflection again I've seen and it happens right now in the parts of this world. I'd argue in this part of the world, it's beyond money or that. People it's that intrinsic thing, this gut thing. And I've been really contemplating this the last few weeks. Like I said, I was discussing this with Lee about how we all know in our guts about certain things. And we all have that guttural instinct about certain people and certain things and certain elements in life and everything. But we're all, like we'll be discussing tonight, we do so much in our lives to push these things back and say, no, 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 no. And it goes to say that antenna thing. Maybe a lot of us, if we just opened ourselves up and went with our guts on a lot of things and didn't have these flights of ego and flights of just I want to dominate and I want to, but just went with that flow with things, maybe we could achieve so much as, like you said, as one-to-one individuals. I mean, like you said, Meg, I mean, it goes back to the old Bill Hicks one. It's no surprise they don't want, on the media, or they don't want their children being taught like, oh, by the way, if you used your brain, you could, literally do anything. Of course they don't. Now, but to bub with the weather. Of course, that's the whole point of it. They don't want human beings, as you said. They're just programming us as machines, for want of a better word. But that's the truth of all of us. We've all got it inside of us, each and every single one of us. And if we, whatever level of consciousness we're at, we've all got something. We've all got something we can find, and taking that. And that's what I'm saying, mate. It's that whole, sometimes you just know, and you've got to go with your gut. And it's having that, as I said before, breaking over that, overcoming that fear and going, okay, I am now just in that murky water. I am in the void, just prodding with the dark. I know roughly where I'm going to go to, but I don't have any ego to know what I'm going towards and what it is. And you, like you said, and if you do that, you become, like I said, antennized, because it's just all around us all the time. And then things can happen. And then this is, I'm saying, it relates to that whole thing, because that's what I was saying about James Watt. None of it's about money. None of it's about that. It's about going with your guts. And then, as I said before, this is, I think I don't want to paint utopias and stuff like that, but I think if we do get to a post-money society, and I think maybe many of us do live in a post-money society, because a lot of it is all done by how we all feel each other by guts. And a lot of that is done by, okay, like you said, what have people done with their money? Instead of just being, oh, we hate the rich, it's about, well, what's that person done with it? How have they manifested their intent? And that's what I love about, I think you briefly touched upon it. You're saying you obviously what you're doing with Satori and what we're all building and stuff. Is you see this general thing about, okay, this push towards this almost a principle of like, okay, let's gather around that idea. Let's gather around the idea of that we can all contribute something, and that we can judge each other, because this is. Like I've always, we'd had this discussion when we first talked about this, Megan. It's like we live in this age where we're just all just screaming into the dark. Kids are in the playground with all their machines and shouting and screaming at each other over Twitter and hiding behind this and that. And it's almost we're in this very weird time in history, because I think that we are in this, because I think we're gonna evolve from it very soon. And we're going to start to use these tools. And that's the moment when people go, okay, instead of just using all these tools, something me and Lee discuss all the time, instead of using all the tools, how they've been given to us, let's just give all the tools and see what people want to do with them. And this is, again, all the things, as you say, mate, it's that whole point of questioning yourself, but kind of knowing where you want to go to. But even at your time, yourself a bit, always judge yourself. And it goes back to that artwork. So always, I'll really bring it back to that. When I'm doing a piece of artwork, it's the same principle. You start with nothing. You're drawing, like you said, to happen little accidents. And the greatest mistake, the greatest lesson to learn, and I learned this the hard way as an artist, was it's that point to step back and walk away. And maybe it's just step back for a week and you look back at it, or maybe it's and you get to that point.
That's the skill that every artist has to learn, is when to finish,
exactly.
when to stop. Think, I'm finished now. But I think we're at this fork in the road point with humanity, renaissance, fork in the road, as I like to call it. And technology is kind of a bit of a double-edged sword, in the sense that, and I know I've said this before, it can be quite divisive, because we're all living in this weird little virtual reality bubbles, communicating with each other. But also the internet is great in the sense that it's just, you've got all this knowledge and information at your fingertips if you want to go and look for it. I mean, if you want to be an ignorant person and just go on Facebook and of your Costa coffee and or use it to big yourself up in an egotistical way and remain quite ignorant to all the other knowledge and information that's there at your fingertips, then obviously that's part of living in this reality, is the free will that goes with it. Every human being on this earth has free will to do as they please and to do what they want. And obviously you can't take that away from people. But so I think, like I say, we're at this fork in the road point now with humanity. And I kind of see that there's going to be a split in consciousness. So like you've got all these different parallel realities going on around, constantly. People who are kind of very much into the new age think, oh yeah, the fifth dimension, are we going to wake up into this new one day and we're going to be in this new high definition world planet and we can manifest whatever we want? It's not quite that way. I mean, it's not a case of we're just going to wake up one day and it's just suddenly going to be all different. It's going to be a case of consciousness taking you into the reality that you want to create, and then everything in your reality will reflect your state of consciousness. So people kind of have to get their head around the fact that there's only them, and each human being that is separate to ourselves, to the self, is a reflection of us. And when you look at the planet in its entirety, everything's connected. When you look at the sacred geometry and intricacies of plants and trees and animals and everything that we see, it's all connected to the human form. That there's similarities and connections and everything. So that's kind of the big hint that we're all connected. The big hint to everybody that a lot of people still can't see yet is that we're all connected. So whatever we choose to think and feel, after that everything becomes reflective like a mirror. So all the people that come into our lives synchronistically and the things that happen are just a reflection of the way we think and feel, or our current state of consciousness, which is constantly morphing. So this whole thing with parallel realities is that people move into different parallel realities constantly, just from their thoughts, their thought process. I think I said this before, like when somebody's recalling what they did on a particular day, or it might have been 2 days previous, as they're having that thought process and they're recalling those memories or thinking about what they did during that day, they're just by having that thought process and thinking about those things, they're morphing into a new reality. And then they go to sleep and they wake up the next day and they're in a new reality. That they've moved into a new parallel reality already. So with new experiences, and it's just that people aren't aware of what's actually happening. So I think when people say, well, what can we do to change things? My first answer to that would be to start learning about the human mind and the brain and how powerful the human mind, the imagination is. Because we're kind of taught in schools that not to daydream, in other words, don't tap into your imagination. But that's basically the basis of everything in creation that's ever come into creation. Anything that was ever invented that was a major turning point for humanity at any point through history came from somebody's imagination. It started off as a thought in somebody's brain, and then it ended up becoming a physical reality. So people who think it's hippie and weird and frivolous and pointless, and you need to get your head out of the clouds and you need to get down to earth and live in the real world, or well, that is the real world. The real world is based on imagination, because
Yeah,
everything that has ever come into existence started off as a thought in someone's head. So thoughts become things. They become physical reality things. Um, so I think that's what people need to know. I think people need to understand more about how the human brain works, and then they'll start to understand the power that they have to sort of shape their lives based on having more of a conscious thought process, rather than just kind of going through life in a kind of ignorant, unconscious way, which doesn't necessarily make people bad. It doesn't make you a bad person, or doesn't mean that you don't do anything good. It just means that you're not in control of anything, because you're not consciously aware of your thoughts. And that's obviously where the meditation can come in really handy, because meditation will teach you to become more aware of your thought process. When you become more aware of your thought process, you become the master of your reality.
yep.
You can become a conscious creator of your reality. So I think that's the key for people, is to understand, how their brain works and how they can actually bring things into existence. And if they want to get rid of things collectively, in society, or just in their own individual lives, if they can understand how the human brain works, they can understand that they can create new programs in the brain or in the subconscious, and then that will become the reality.
Yeah.
If people can understand how that works. And sometimes it's a case of explaining things to people in a slightly different way. You might, if you're helping people, you might need to use different metaphors for different people, depending on who you're dealing with, because people grasp things in a different way depending on how you explain something to them. There's certain people that if you explain it in a certain way, they'll just immediately switch off, because they'll just think, oh, that's just a load of hippie new age garbage, I'm not interested in that. But if you use a metaphor that appeals to a specific person, they can then grasp it. And I think that's the key for a lot of these pioneer people that are doing all this great work and having podcasts like yourself, Tim, and other people that are doing these things. If you can get through to it, different people in different ways, I think that's going to be really helpful for people. And I think just the very act of doing this type of work, it gives people hope, and it gives people confidence to think that they can do the same. you know so I don't think there is an exact formula, but there's a few key things that you can be mindful when you're sharing knowledge. And I think another thing is to be congruent with the information, or the sources and the things where you get your information
Yeah.
from. That can be quite important. I mean, it sounds like an obvious thing, but people don't always think that when they're just getting into a chat, and you can just get into the flow of a chat, which is important. You don't want to be too kind of structured about something, but I think it's good to be congruent with your facts and information when you're relaying knowledge to other people. But yeah, it's a hard one, really, trying to get through to different types of people. And of course, some people are just, I think we have to accept the fact that certain people are at a certain state of their awareness, their evolutionary or their solar evolution, where they're not necessarily going to grasp any of these things, and they're not going to want to acknowledge these things because they're not at that level yet. And I think this is where there could potentially be this fork in the road divide in consciousness, where there could potentially be two parallel realities, in terms of like this new age fifth dimensional reality that people talk about. There could be like a collective consciousness that enter into that fifth dimension, and then there could be another collective consciousness that stay in the old paradigm. So a bit like an atom splitting. I think that would put I mean, I kind of feel that is what's happening already. I think there's kind of two schools of thought. So there's going to be one parallel reality, which is the old paradigm, the old 3D Earth paradigm, and then you're going to have like the new Earth or the new. I think
Hmm.
that's what it is. It's just a split in consciousness,
Yeah,
and each reality will be totally unaware of each other. That there'll be no awareness of the fifth dimensional reality, if that makes sense, from the ones that stay existing within the old paradigm. It'll be like they're the only ones that exist. So that could be another that could be another talking point. We could go into detail about that whole thing about the two different realities splitting and all the rest of it. That could be another talking point for another show. But I'm a firm believer in the fact that that's already happened.
yeah,
I actually think that's already happened.
yeah. And I think to sort of bring this into a focus of realm of where we are right now, Megan, I do see this as the early steps are being taken onto this. And I think if you take a step back, and I'll give you a personal reflection. I've done 300 plus of these conversations, and one of the maybe not sort of overly spoken truths about many creative people I've spoken to, in that I use the hashtag all the time, but it's herding cats, and they're very, as we've spoken upon, because they are very creative. They're very all this conversation is about. They're very individualistic people, and honestly, it's one of the reflections I say to I feel like week after week I have the same conversation, and I feel like, man, we were all on the same page, but trying to get us all together is horrendous because they're very much individualistic. Like I say, cats, then it's not like a case of herding sheep. The cats are very much, but the first steps are being taken towards this. And I think one of the things that, and it's a personal thing, I talk to many creative people, not only on online in public, but equally obviously just in my own circle of friends, and I think it's something that I think it's the deflection I think we can take back to people who are, say, all that we've spoken about tonight, all the people that, for want of a better word, we're going to bracket into being creative or open-minded or whatever we want to call them. But our weakness, our Achilles heel, is we don't reach out to each other. We sit and have these conversations, and I've done it. I've been on this planet long enough to see this, Meg. I've seen it over and over and over and over and over again. And I just think, why is it we all have the same conversations and then we just dissipate and nothing ever happens? Now, I don't think it's ego, and I do think there is an element of obviously ego in it, and people get entrenched into their own little, almost echo chambers, and that's something I found more. It's not particularly individual ego, but there's almost echo chamber ego, and it's kind of like they have their own little, almost a larger, for want of a word, a super ego of the group itself, and these little groups divide up, and I see it in my reflection, particularly in the crypto world, particularly in the decentralized world, the people that try, and it's like all these dissipated groups, and that's our Achilles heel. Because I say it on we look at a really wide sense, and you look at, and like I say, in this humanity split, we will look at on a day-to-day level of us as living in this consciousness right now, that there's already enough energy being spent on this earth to split and divide us as human beings. And there's a few people, there always has been, the creative people and the outsiders, for want of who have always throughout history have been the ones that have, like we've been discussing tonight, on the edges, pushing things, experimenting things, just off on their own little individual paths to sort of, like I said, outside, as you said earlier on, they've got their own, again, their own missions. They have their own private missions, their own questions they want to fulfill, their own things they want to achieve. And these people have always been on the edge. And there's this whole other set, as we, that are dividing. And then this group over here who have so much, as you said, I think all the knowledge, all the power, all the things we have as creative people that, like you said, that whole, if you go back to your analogy of the left hand and the right hand brain, why is it the whole of the society right now, the world we live in, particularly over here, they're crying out for creative people because they've just bred these one side, and all us creative people over here know what we've got, knowing we all know it. We each have. I don't care what any individual says. Person who's truly creative, we all deep inside us know. We know. We're like, whoa, we've got something that is untouchable by money. This can't be bought. It's ethereal. It's something that, like we've spent 2 and a bit hours talking about tonight. But What are we doing? Well, us people, us creative cats, we're all just squabbling with each other. We're all just sitting in our own corners, man, like literally just clawing at each other. And that's something that, if you talk about that fork in humanity, Meg, and this is where it's going to come down to, we've got to make the effort, as I say, right, from us as individual people, to start reaching out. We've got to do it. We've got to reach out, and we've got the, you know, the things there. I mean, I can speak for myself. That's been one of the main drives behind N99. Beyond anything else, is just to get a few people, and we can just connect us up, because I truly know this. It's not even a belief. I know if we could get 10% of the people I've had in the conversations on Life is People alone, and all just to, you know, in our own, like we described tonight, in our own forms and doing our own little bits to push something, we could change the world in a year. But I'm sure history, you know, is littered by groups of people that sat around having this conversation, and then nothing ever happened, nothing ever happened, and nothing ever happened. And it's that, as you spoke on before earlier on, Meg, whether it's the resistance of just life itself, but the resistance of just being a creative person. But we all fall into that laziness, and
I think, you know, the key, like you're saying, and I think this is the absolute key to actually changing something, as you're saying, is the congruence. So, like, if you have an awareness and a knowledge and an idea, and you know that you can bring people together using that knowledge and that idea, then that in itself is the congruence, because obviously you have an intent, and then the activity, you know, in this case creating N99, or it could be something else, to bring these people together, that is the activity that is congruent with the intent of what you're doing, of what you want to achieve, or what you're trying to achieve. And as far as I'm concerned, it's a winning formula to be congruent with your intent, the action, and then the knowledge that you impart and share with other people. Those are the three elements. So you have a clear intent of what you want to achieve. You then perform an activity that is congruent to the intent of what it is that you want to achieve ultimately. And then the knowledge and sharing process, and the process of carrying that activity out. So in this case would be what we're doing right now. You know, everything that is relevant to creating that platform. So using N99 as an example. So those three steps, those congruent steps, so they're all in sync with each other, is a winning formula. It will come to fruition. It will happen. I completely believe that it will. It's like anything. If you want to achieve something and bring it into full fruition, manifestation, into reality, you just have to be clear about the intent, the action, and then, you know, the knowledge that comes from that, the sharing of the knowledge, or the sharing of the information.
exactly.
You know, the activity that you perform.
Yeah, even beyond that, and Megan, this goes back to this, bringing back to the very beginning of what you said. I mean, that image I drew of Lee, for example, I didn't start off knowing that was going to end up like that, and half the skill, or half the discipline or knowledge you've got to gain is going allow yourself to, when things reveal themselves, as you just saying in front of you, go with it. Don't be fearful of it. Like, okay, go with green. Go with a green background, or go with it and go with those mistakes, because I think this is I think my takeaway element of this whole conversation really is, I think we're both from the, you know, both sort of speaking from the same sort of point of view, is it's that whole, just go with yourself. And I know it's something we say over and over again, but it brings it back to where we started this conversation on, when you're describing about when you're going out into the process of doing artwork again. You, like what we've just described, whether it's a piece of artwork or it's life itself, it's, you start with something, and you've got to almost, like you said, trust yourself. And that trusting yourself is, if anyone can do that, and like I say, and if more, that's where you can say, if that can be spread around and people could trust themselves, it's, you know, it's that alone, Meg, would change so much so quickly. It really would, because, as I say, we're just told from so many angles not to trust ourselves, and Aaron Datley was speaking upon. There's so many from everywhere, and every source is coming about don't trust yourselves and turn yourself over to someone else, and the element of it
Yeah, I
always
think
comes down to
people
you can just
they they have an idea, and then they have an exact kind of plan in their head about how they want that idea to play out, or how they're going to go about um, bringing that idea into form. And sometimes when things happen that aren't part of their original plan of what they set out to do, they perceive that as some form of failure, or they perceive it as something going wrong. But quite often that's actually just part of the process. This kind of sounds a bit contradictory to what I was saying before about the congruence of having this intent, and then the actions are congruent to the intent and all the rest of it. But you can have an idea and say, right, my intention is to do X, Y, or Z. And then you literally just start putting the wheels in motion. So at that point, you don't necessarily have to have a clear plan of action. You just have to have a clear intent. I think that's maybe a better way of explaining it. You have to have a clear intent. Then you just start performing small things. It doesn't even have to be anything major, just small things that reflect that intent, that are you know in sync with what you originally planned to do. And then sometimes things start to play out in a certain way, not necessarily how you envisage them to play out. And this is where a lot of people um, give up or become disillusioned, because it's kind of like when that, you plant a seed and you just start to see something, growing. It's just starting to pop through the soil. It's just starting to come out. Um, and then something happens that is not quite in keeping with your original plan in your head, and or you may see it as some kind of obstacle or pitfall. Like you might have planned to meet somebody or speak to somebody in relation to a particular project, and then it didn't happen, or it didn't occur. So then you're like, oh god. So people literally just see something just about to sprout through the soil, and then they give up at that point because something happens that they didn't plan for, and they immediately see that as some form of failure, or something going wrong, when in actual fact that's exactly how it was supposed to play out. Because quite often in life things don't often go the route that we originally planned or thought they were going to go. Sometimes it can seem like we're completely going off the track, like we're completely going off in a different direction. We're thinking, no, that's not the direction I wanted to go in. This is all going horribly wrong. And at that point, this is where people give up, or they say, they just throw in the towel, thinking it's all gone horribly wrong. And then they say, I don't believe in any of this stuff. I don't. If it's to do with manifesting your desire, people suddenly say at that point, I don't believe in any of it. I tried it. I followed the formula to the letter, and this happened. But they just didn't stay with it long enough to see where that was going to lead them. Because sometimes it can seem like you're being led up all these weird roads and paths to get to this point of where you want to be, and it seems irrelevant to any of the things that you'd originally planned. It seems totally disconnected, and you're thinking, this is really weird. This isn't how I envisaged it to be at all. So like I say, people then think that there's something's gone wrong. They then start thinking that they're a failure, and yet another thing's gone wrong that they had all these high hopes for. They then give up. But if they'd just gone with it, they just trust. If I think people just need to trust the process. If they've got a clear intent, I think that's the key thing at the very beginning. A lot of people as well, they don't have a very clear intent about what it is they actually want, or they keep changing what the intention is. So they might initially have an idea, which is the intention, and then halfway down the line they change the idea in their head. So then things change to reflect that. And then the whole thing becomes a bit confused and it's going off in all these different directions because they haven't sort of stayed true to their original plan or their original intent. You know, that's kind of where the congruency comes into it, is that you have this clear intent and you have to try and hold that clear intent without, it's very difficult, you know, living in this reality because there's a lot of distractions. And also if you're a creative person, you're probably very easily distracted. I know I am. So you can quite easily get distracted onto something else. When I quite often have like 3 or 4 different canvases on the go. And what tends to happen, which I think is a good thing, I'll be working on one, and as I'm working on one canvas, which is totally unrelated to another picture that I'm doing or another painting I'm doing, it in whatever I'm doing on the current, you know, if I'm working on one, that particular painting will inspire me to do something on another painting that's totally unrelated. And I'll quite often abandon the painting that I'm currently working on at that moment in time and go across to another one, and I'll be working on that one. Because people have said to me in the past, why don't you just do one, finish it, and then move on to the next one, you know, in a linear fashion. But I just don't work that way because I find that each piece inspires me to do another little bit on something else. So quite often, you know, you can have an intent to do something and it can lead you into all these different directions that seem very disconnected and very disorganized. But I think you just have to trust the process because ultimately, if you had a clear intent at the beginning, you can't fail. If you have a clear intent to achieve something and you do, it can be the smallest action, um, whatever the action is, if it's relevant and congruent to the thing that you originally intended to create, it will work. It will happen. It might not happen in the way you originally imagined it to happen, because people have a tendency to do that. They sort of play out these fantasies in their brain about how things are going to go, you know, when they have an idea about what they want to achieve. And then when it doesn't quite play out in the same way as how they originally thought it was going to play out, um, they get disappointed and they get despondent and think, oh, no, it's not working, it's all going wrong. They give up on that project and they start something new, and then they have a new intent, and then they've got to go through the whole process again. So they won't quite see it through to the end. But I think if you just trust the process, even if it seems totally disjointed, it will it will work as long as you stay true to the original intent and you perform an action that is connected to that intent. And that's people sort of, I think a lot of it is people make it too complicated and they think something couldn't possibly be that simple, but it really is that simple. You know, that's literally all you have to do, which is why I think the network will succeed because, you know, as long as the actions reflect the intent, then then the rest of it will just happen naturally. It will just all fall into place.
Yeah, you're right, Megan. I think that I think a great reflection as I can give is I would say 90% of the artwork I'm asked to do for EPs or album covers and stuff, it's exactly what you just described. You know, I'll end up doing 5 or 6, and it invariably is always the one I didn't think was going to be. A perfect example. I'll give you the Ceiling Demons one. On their very first album cover, I did, like I said, I had 7, 8 canvases on the go. One I spent absolutely 2 months absolutely doing almost specifically what, you know, walking it step through with the band what they wanted. And the one they used for their album cover was something I just, at the end of the day, when I finished that one, I was like, okay. And it was just at the end of the day, it's just boom. And that was the one they used and everyone loves. And this is the whole element. If you, these things will come out if your intent was that. And I think I relate to that because it's kind of what we've been describing all night. I mean, I may have gone into that whole step by step with every album cover I've ever gone into with an idea that you know, how I get to it, have an idea, but it will be something along the path, something that will be discarded. The other element, And that's the old be water, my friend. That's where that comes into mind. Because if you've got any kind of strict mindset and you don't allow yourself to, and you go, no, this is going to be it, this is going to be the one, you won't get anywhere. I would never have been anywhere. I would have never been half of the stuff I've made for albums and stuff. I would have never, none of them. If it had been my original, how I went with it and all the time and effort I put into it. But now I don't not go into it and think I just follow the same process. I think, okay, I'll get many on the go. One of these will happen. It's sowing seeds. It's the same with any element. And I think that, as you said, it's the intent. As long as you've got the intent, and that's the answer of the question, not the end, what you want to shape it as, because that analogy of the seed is exactly what I've used many times. Is exactly that. We don't know what's going to come out of it, but the intent is to water the seed,
Well,
nurture the seed, and see
that's
what
the thing. You
happens.
just hit the nail on the head there, I think, as well, Tim. Because quite often when we have an intent to create something, we at that moment in time we know what we want to achieve and what we want to get out of something or we want to create, but we don't actually know ultimately what is going to happen. Nobody does at that point. So like you have the intent and then you perform the action that is congruent to the intent, but at that point we don't actually know what's going to happen, and usually if you go with it, it can quite often be something better than you actually envisaged if you just trust the process and see it through. um, and you just have to keep performing the actions that are connected to that intent. That's literally all you have to do, and then you just see what comes from that. um, and the chances are you will achieve the goal or what you originally set out to achieve and more. The chances are probably you'll probably achieve more than you ever sort of dreamt that you would achieve. Something better will come of it. It's quite often, like you were saying about doing the album covers, it might be a case, so this is just like a fake story, but say somebody asked you to do an album cover and you had three different paintings on the go, and you had a specific idea to do a certain type of design, worked your ass off doing all this stuff, and then you'd done some other thing, and then it turned out that that was the chosen image or whatever, and then it turned out that something amazing came from their music or from their promotional work due to the fact that you use this other image. And it was, you might have been thinking, oh God, I spent all the time on that image and they've gone and chosen this other one. You might have thought, well, I'll do like three different images and I'll let them have it will give them a choice rather than just giving them one thing. If they sort of like put all the design work into your hands. So you think, right, okay, I'll give them a choice. And then they pick the one that you've spent the least amount of time on, possibly the one that you actually thought on a personal level was the worst. Perhaps you didn't like it. You spent hours and hours of work on this other one. Like you kind of this could potentially be an ego thing as well. You might have thought, yeah, well, that was the one that I spent all the time on, and I felt sure that they were going to pick that, and then they didn't pick it. But then it turned out that the image that they picked was the best thing for them, and then it might have led into something better for you as well. You just don't know. The point I'm trying to make is you don't know where things are going to lead, even if they don't seem the right thing at the time. So, but I think people find it hard not to be in complete control of something. They want to control every part of the process, and that's all part of letting go and not having the fear take over. You know, getting over the fear thing is being able to let go and just trust the process. And that famous phrase, go with the flow. Just literally go with the flow and see what comes from it. And I kind of think one of the things that I enjoy about doing artwork is, like you were saying, you start with this blank canvas and you just sort of think, if you're like a visionary artist, you just think, oh, I don't know how this is going to evolve. um, and that's part of the excitement, is to sort of see what it's going to become, how it's going to evolve. And even if you make mistakes and you did plan some of it, it didn't go according to plan, you make all these so-called mistakes, but then it becomes something amazing with all the mistakes incorporated that weren't actually mistakes at all. When you reflect on it, you think, well, no, actually, they weren't mistakes. They were obviously meant to be there because they've created the ultimate. They've created the end result, which is actually really good. So, yeah, I think that's what you have to do. Just trust the process, and yeah, it's one of the hardest things for human beings to do because they still have that element of concern and fear of things going wrong or being a failure.
Or the other one, Meg, and this is the other side of it. I mean, this is the other duality to this whole what you just said. I mean, people have a fear of being a failure. I've met plenty of people who've had a fear of being a success. They fear of having actually what they do achieving because it's kind of like, okay, what would I do after that? And there's all the fear around that, or they just
Yeah,
don't.
for
So,
sure.
so this is an unspoken one as well. And I think that what you're trying to say is that one of the lessons I've learned is, and it's particularly showing you do artwork, is that is a real kind of I think element to people when they're fearful of success is like you don't have to worry about that because it's always on to the next one. Once like people always ask me what's your favorite piece of art. I'm like the one I did, the last one I did, and then it's always the last one I did because it's always just you're moving on and moving on. So I think that is almost one of the greatest myths or lies ever told, that be afraid of your own success, and I think that's such
That's a really, really interesting thing you say that because so many people, they have a fantasy about being really successful at something or wanting to achieve some possible fame or status in some area of their lives. I don't mean like in a celebrity way, but it could be just some kind of social status. And they have this fantasy, but so many people have a fantasy about something, and they keep saying, oh, I really want to achieve this, but it just doesn't happen for me. Yet these other people just seem to, you know, achieve these things really easily. Like they don't have to make any effort and it just happens for them really easily. And I think to myself, well, there must be something deep in that person's subconscious that is actually telling them that they don't want to achieve that level of success because they're not ready for it in some way, or they fear what that degree of success will actually bring. So they actually keep perpetuating these cycles where they don't actually achieve the success that they think that they want to achieve, because actually there's an underlying fear of maybe it could just be something like they don't want to have that much exposure. They don't want to be out there in the front, exposed, and everybody paying them
Mhm.
attention, because
Mhm.
it could be something really simple, like when they were a kid they might have won an award and a couple of their friends might have been nasty to them because they were jealous of the fact that they'd won this award for like a writing competition or something, and they might have been really abusive and horrible to them. That might have anchored into their brain, and there might be this whole fear of like, oh, everybody will think I love myself, or I think everybody will think that I think I'm better than them. And this won't be necessarily something they're consciously aware of. This could be something deep rooted into their subconscious. So they're consciously thinking and fantasizing about achieving these great successful things, but they don't actually achieve them because there's this underlying fear of what happens as a result of them becoming that successful.
Oh, you're right,
So
Megan.
yeah, so there are a lot of people that, like you're saying, they're not even aware of it, but they fear having the experience of that sort of degree or level of success.
Yeah, I think that plays into what we were discussing earlier on about that thought, because for that, I'll be real here. I've never met one creative person who desires any kind of fame. It's the one thing I think you just hit upon the head exactly. The one thing that is probably stops a lot of people being fulfilling their full potential because they know what's coming. They know. And I've talked to computer programmers, I've talked to artists, musicians, and it's that they're like the reality of they know what's going to come. They like their isolation. They like the fact they can just disappear and be anonymous. Meg, the amount of bands I know have written songs, literally called Anonymous, and the desire to be anonymous and be able to walk down the street and just to live a normal life. So that is that fork in I think we can concur on. I think that's where it's going to go into society, because it's going to need both sides. Because if we want creative people, and we want all the beautiful things that creative people can offer, and all the innovation, and just the general push towards enlightenment and beauty, and the better of us as a species of beings, if we want those things, then like I said, the fork in the road is people have got to decide, like, okay, how are we going to treat those people? How are we going to view those people? Do we like we are? We've built a society where, that's what I'm saying. I was contemplating the other day. Imagine what Einstein, if he was alive right now. It's just all about fame. He would have Twitter. Twitter would be followed. And it's like, none of us want that. And that's, if we it's the element. So that's what. And again, it stems back to us as an individual. We have got to stop breaking down. We've got to pull ourselves down for having gods and these our own idols that we put up. So instead of seeing someone like whoever it may be, anyone's personal idol, whether it's a musician, a sports person, a film actress, or a film star, or anything it may be, that mentality of putting them above everybody else is that whole stick in the wheel of what's ground us to a halt, because we can't expect to move forward when we're going to literally put people in golden chains and say to them, we're going to watch everything you say, everything you do. You can't move this, you can't say that. And like you said, oh great. So then people are caught in this weird dichotomy that they want all the fame, which they think goes with it, but they don't think what goes through with it. Then they do think what goes through with it, and hear tales from the other side. So then get fearful, then meld the two to, I can't be successful, I can't follow my own what I want to do, because that's going to lead to that. Now there is an element of truth in that. That is why the myths have stories about wolves and beasts, because there's an element of truth about it. But like you say, that's something we're in ourselves, and we've got to do with ourselves, because we can't expect, as you were saying earlier on, we can't expect everyone to turn around and go, well, it's everybody else's fault that everyone's like that. We've all got to be like that. We've got to treat, as we've been the theme of this conversation, we've got to treat each other as how they present themselves to us in that moment, and treat them as Martin Luther King said, on the content of their character rather than anything else. Judge, if we went to that, but that's for us to do. And I think you were saying it earlier on, Megan. This is where maybe that fault is going to come, because it's so easy, particularly in the world we live in, the society we live in, to go with the flow, go with the herd. And like you go back, and then, like you said before, it goes right back to the beginning of this conversation. You've got dads who like, well, okay, I'll go with the flow, provide the money, rather than spending my time with kids. And it's this whole thing. We've got to question ourselves, well, what we desire and what we want in life. And I think that's one of the first questions we've got to ask, is if we want creative people and we want all the innovation, then we, as human beings, have got to go, right, we've got to pull down all this thing we have in our heads about these special people and these idols over here, and we just got to see it as like, no, like we've just had like tonight, a good conversation about the process of what it's like to be a human being, the process of creativity, and not putting it down to any of this kind of like gods and these people are special magical people, or these people, no, they're not chosen, not anything else. They've progress down a path, and that path, if it's enlightened, it inspires, and if it's not enlightened, we put them into gods, and then like I said, we're back to that whole step-by-step process to they're up here, so then we feel now, because we're jealous as human beings, we've got to put them under all this scrutiny. And it's a sickness of our age that only happens really in certain parts of society. It's not a worldwide thing. I mean, it's not like you go to every part of the world and they've got tabloids and this attitude towards certain people who can sing or look pretty or can create a piece of music or do an artwork. They don't put them on these elevated statuses. They just see them as people who are good at what they do, and as it would have been, as we should be treating Einstein, like they treated Einstein. Just just put him in a room, let him do what he wants to do. Don't make him up front and push him in front of every awards show. That's, like I say, that's something we all have to wrestle with in ourselves, because, as you said earlier on, Meg, this starts from us as individuals, and we've got to treat other people like that, and it becomes for want of a better word, a meme. People start to see it. I was saying it wrong. People start to see how you're acting in your life and how you're acting to people, and they get it. It does affect. It's not about what you say at half the time. I think it's about what you do and what you don't do. Anyway, Meg, we started this conversation. We talked about artwork. We've had a very kind of roundabout conversation about fifth dimensional sorts of, psychological issues and how we are as a creative person. I want to finish this off because um, I just want to finish this off on saying that obviously we started up this group, and I saw you pop a Rachmaninoff group, and I was like, wow, I just because I can maybe meet. I don't know, go a whole year. I don't meet many people who've even heard of Rachmaninoff, let alone have any kind of enjoyment in him. So, where did your kind of I don't know your love affair or your interest in Rachmaninoff start?
Well, it was actually a film that I watched years ago, starring Christopher Reeve and Jane Seymour. It was a film called Somewhere in Time. I don't know if you've ever seen that film. And it's about a man that he's actually a playwright, and he's having a sort of a launch party of a play that he's written, sort of with all his university friends. And this old woman turns up, and she just walks up to him. She just says, "Oh, come back to me, Richard." It's just this really weird thing. She just walks up to him, hands him like a watch, and says, "Come back to me." And she goes off. And then he kind of does all this research on her and finds out that she was this actress in 1910. He does more research, and he discovers that he was living in that time in 1910. So he was like either some kind of time traveler, or he'd had a past life and he'd known this woman. Anyway, he goes and speaks to one of his old college professors who wrote a book about time travel, and he basically wants to ask this key question to this university professor: is time travel possible, basically? And he's basically saying, well, if you create the right environment, if you do X, Y, and Z, then there's a potential that you could travel back into, a different time, or forwards in a different time. Anyway, the upshot is there was some music by Rachmaninoff that I really loved, that he composed for that film. So that was my first, I think it's called Theme. I can't remember the name of it now, but it was like a piece of music that I posted on N99, that came from that film. It was in that film, and that was when I first discovered it, and I just loved it. I thought it was the most amazing piece of music, and that's how how I got into him, from this film with Christopher Reeve and Jane Seymour. If you've never seen it, it's a good film, actually. It's worth watching. It's one of those weird random films that you don't get very often. He ends up traveling back in time, meeting this woman, but obviously she's a lot younger then, back in 1910. They kind of fall in love, and eventually they get together and everything, and he decides he's going to stay in that time. He's kind of forgotten that he comes from the future, and they're sort of sat in a room together, and she said, "Oh, one of the first things I'm going to do tomorrow is we're going to go out and buy you a new suit, because your suit's really dated." So the suit that he bought when he was like trying to go back in time, because his college professor had said, right, you've got to basically remove anything from the modern day, and get your mind into this mode of believing that you're living in that time, and then you can literally time travel to that moment in time. Anyway, so he's got this other suit on, and he's going, "Oh, I don't know why you don't like this suit. It's really cool." And she's going, "Oh yeah, but it's really dated," because he'd obviously got the time slightly wrong when he got this suit, so he could originally go back in time. Anyway, he goes into like the little pocket at the front of his suit, and he pulls out a coin that's from the modern day, and he gets immediately kind of transported back to his original time, to his current time. And then he just is so kind of lovesick and depressed that he just kind of dies from a broken heart. It's quite a sad sort of story. Dies from this broken heart, but this is why the
Meg, I can't hear you. Your voice, your
oh,
mic. That's it.
can you hear me now?
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, I've always been into classical music and I really like Beethoven, and so I kind of thought it'd be cool to create some groups on N99 and music. I've got lots more that I can think of. I'm quite into Chopin as well. So I think I created a Chopin group.
Hmm.
Um, I just thought there'd be some good starting points,
No, no, no.
starting groups to have.
I think what's great about it, Megan, I think it's and again, it's just an individual process I have, but I think it's I've had other people, other artists I've spoken to have the same sort of thing. But I love creating to particularly instrumental music. I find whenever a word I can't listen to, well, I can do. I have created to stuff that's got words in, but of a choice, much more of an one I'm comfortably going to. It's long instrumental music, and I don't mind what it is. As long as it's kind of not too sort of technical sort of thing, but
Yeah, I'm the
particularly
same.
I love particularly piano music because what I find fascinating about um it is related to what you just said. They're time machines, and I think they're just when I listen to people like Rachmaninoff and you start to think where he was in time, and I think it's one of the fascinating things, and maybe it's for another conversation again, but it's one of the it's kind of the unspoken elements of all of creative element, anything you do creativity. I don't think many people sort of think, okay, they think of it in the moment and now, but they think something like how did Rachmaninoff get through 200 years? How did the Bible get through 2,000 years? How did the Torah get through those years? How did certain pieces of artwork get through those years? And that's what to me separates those. That's what we talked about tonight. That discipline, that skill, and maybe in your lifetime you get to have that one moment where you have that thing that can be projected through time. And that's if we all get that one moment. I think that's the one of the drives that I think many people creative hope to have something that can maybe isn't about the moment and now, but will literally be for want of a better word, a time machine. Your piece of music will still have some relevance in 200 years' time. No, not that maybe no one ever know what you look like, what you do, but you'll carry a part of your something you created through and through. And that is the ultimate thing about when you do create something. You are ultimately hoping that it's going to have some sort of effect, and if you can have an effect over time, that's something that's I don't know. It really excites me
That
as a
was one
creative
of
person.
the reasons behind me thinking of creating these portraits of some of these people in on Minds, because I thought, well, Bill Ottman's created this platform that's kind of a turning point in a way. He's created something for people to um, express themselves, and there's no sort of hindrance in that department. It's kind of a starting point. I'm thinking, well, as we go down the line, sort of many years from now, some of these people could be remembered, as kind of pioneers of changing
Hmm.
the paradigm. And I was thinking, well, if there was some evidence that these people existed, you know, somewhere, that could be a really good thing, that there would be some kind of picture of these people or some evidence of these people existing if they were, you know, pioneers of changing the current paradigm of the way society is and the way things are going for the better. So I was thinking that was what my thinking process was when I was thinking about creating them. Because when Minds first came out, I that's kind of how I saw it, as this really um, sort of potential collective consciousness changing platform for people. And the only thing is with a lot of these things, quite often as things progress, and more people come on board, sometimes, not always, there can be, not always, but sometimes there can be this kind of too many cooks spoil the broth scenario where
Hmm.
there can just be too much interaction, and it kind of ends up with the wheel spinning in the mud and not really getting anywhere, and things happening. But at the end of the day, that's just part of the process. And then you
Hmm.
find that if you stick with something, like we were saying before about sticking with something, going with the flow, it finds its way back onto the path again, and it still continues in a positive way. So you still get a positive result ultimately. But that's kind of how I saw mines. It seemed like such an amazing place initially. It was so different from all the other platforms, and the people that came onto mines I just thought were amazing. And it was kind of this place where Satori always has this mantra. He calls it his mantra: find the others.
Mm.
As in find the other people that have this
Hmm.
awareness of what's really going on in the world, and the creative mindset of how we can change it for the better. And I found that Mines was one of these places where there were just lots of these people. You could literally go there and find the others, and there'd be loads of people like that you could just connect with and have these conversations with. You didn't feel like you have to suppress yourself on Minds. You didn't feel like, well, I can't really say this stuff because people will think I'm mad, or they'll try and put me in an institution if I start talking about that type of thing. You found that you could go on to Minds and you could just talk about these things. And then, with N99, I feel like it's kind of fine tuning certain the elements of Minds that I really loved, which was like the artistic element, because obviously there's lots of different people on Minds. Um, there's a lot of the YouTubers have migrated there now. Sort of various pundits with their opinions on things, and it's a real mixture of different people. And then you've got a lot of creative people on there still, which is great. And obviously, I'm biased when it comes to creative and music and art, so this is where I think N99 could be great, because it's quite very much geared for those types of people to come on and be creative. And I think we need creative people, because like we were saying before, everything stems from the imagination. Everything that has ever come into our reality and become some anything that's become a physical reality comes from the imagination, which is creative. So, and I think ultimately everybody's creative, whether they're consciously
Hmm.
aware of it or not.
Hmm.
Whether they're predominantly left hemisphere of the brain, linear thinking, or whether they're right hemisphere of the brain, or a balanced person. Ultimately, everybody's creative. It's just that some people are consciously aware of how that works, and other people aren't. But I think to have a place like N99 where all these creatives can immediately go and connect with each other, because you'll I know you'll agree with this, that when you're with other creative people, it inspires you as an artist to
Hmm.
do more stuff. I mean, me and Satori always have these really weird synchronistic situations where we come together and we were having the exact same thought about something, or like we'll be having a conversation and I'll say something and it will trigger some kind of inspiration for him to create one of his mashup, you know, things, or it will just be something I say that it triggers him to do something, or he'll say something to me and it will trigger me to do something. So I think obviously artists will always inspire each other. So to have a platform where all these artists can go, you know, it's going to be amazing. I think, I think it's going to be a great thing. And there's nowhere like that you can go really. There isn't any other platform where you can have all those artists in one place and all inspiring each other. So I can't see it as being anything but good. And I'm sure it's going to progress really well.
Yeah, well, if nothing else, Megan, I think it's going to be fascinating to to watch the process, because it's I was it's like in essence when any tools you're building right now, you're building basically just a box in essence, because it's kind of like as I say before, when you see I'm old enough to watch it, like a perfect example. I lived in Leeds. I saw a scene rise there. You saw these few sort of odd people meet around a certain part of Leeds city centre. They obviously started connecting and talking to each other. They all had little bands, and then boom, the whole goth scene rose. And I'm fascinated. That's like you just said. I mean, whatever happens, I all I know is when you get some creative people in a room together, or in a space together, whether it's virtual, real, whatever it is, but you get creative people talking, and those juices fly. Like you say, not only do they inspire each other, but it things that none of us can foresee come out of these events, and that's what I think is going to be fascinating. Just, and I love, this is what I love about the days we live in right now, because it's that awakening, or as you said, that renaissance that's going on right now. Whereas the tools are there, and people are starting to wake up and start to utilize the tools that are around us. And I think it goes back to, it was, you used the analogy earlier on, you were saying about, oh, well, all that hippy dippy stuff. And the amount of times I get people saying that to me, and I thought, yeah, while you're sitting on your iPhone or your mobile phone, how did all this come around? This was hippy dippy for in the 60s, when people dropped out and thought about stuff. So it's I'm saying they didn't sit around, in the 60s, and the idea was in 30 years' time we'd be on mobile phones and thinking about that. Proof: every science fiction film. You show me a science fiction film made in the 80s where they even foresaw the internet. None of them saw it coming. But the whole point was, out of that collective people getting together and just being themselves, and being able to be themselves, or a bunch of cats, for instance, or a bunch of people just still on the same mindset, in that, and things happen of it. And so, like you say, it's going to be a fascinating thing, because I think this is the thing. There's so many. This universe, this world we live in, is big enough for all these things, and that's what's going to be great. It's this of what it is of what we've been speaking about tonight. I love the idea there's minds. I love the idea that there's other platforms. I love the idea that there's other people trying other things. I don't want to live in a world where there's just one thing. And I mean, that ties into what you said about the fork in the road. This is where people are. We live in the monopolies and stuff. You have one 5 electricity companies, 5 this, 5 that, and it's, in fact, we live in a country, Meg, where let's not make 5, let's make it into one. Let's put everything under one banner. So diversity, like I say, I think it's just going to be fascinating. And I do say this, Meg, and you can look at your daughter and you look her in the eyes and you think, wow. By the time she's my age, this world is going to be a fascinating place. And watching someone live through that age is just to watch that happen is going to be an absolutely fascinating process, because, like you said, whatever happens, and if we can get through this, and we don't just end up blowing ourselves apart and falling to the worst traits of what we as a species have become, and we do just push through, which I think is more likely, because I think we're more, we're like we've been saying tonight, we're more love, and we're more peace, and we're not more war, and we're not more distractions. That's just illusions and stuff. But yeah, it could be a fascinating world, and we're just fortunate enough to. And I was thinking about this just the other day. Like you could have lived between, I don't know. You could have been born in 1790 and died in 1875 and not seen a great amount of change. Your daughter or my son, the amount of change they've seen, the amount of change we've seen, Meg, in our lifetime. We are very fortunate to live in these times. I mean, maybe there'll be another 1,000 years after this that it won't happen again. Maybe we're just at an epoch, and we're very fortunate. And that's why I say it's what we do with these things, because we're very fortunate above anything else to live in this one moment that's sort of like. I think the whole kind of point of this conversation is you could very strongly argue, maybe it's a debate for another time, but it's the accumulation of a lot of knowledge that's pushed us to this point, the good, the bad, and everything. But here we are to this point, this moment of time, and if we want to call it time, but this moment where we are, and we're fortunate to be here, stood here talking And I mean, not only to discuss it and view it, but as you quite eruditely said earlier on, we have the ability to shape it and form it and literally live the lives we've always wanted, and that generations upon generations upon generations before us would have just literally been blown away that we could even concept these things that we're going to do. So like I say, I personally think whenever, I think it goes back to what you said earlier on about, depression and stuff. And, guys, to say, this is simple things you mentioned earlier on, going for walks and stuff. But I mean, a lot of it is just taking a step back and going, wow, wow, wow. Aren't I lucky? For want of a word, aren't we lucky? Aren't we fortunate? Aren't we just the fact we can just breathe and we've got another day on this beautiful planet that's manifest around us, and we've got people around us, and that, even the reality that is this constructed reality around us is a nice one. We're not living in some dystopic hellhole gulag. You know what I mean? So they're all things to be thankful for, and they're all drives towards. Again, that's what I say, Meg. These are the drives towards, like, why we do things, because I don't want to be dragged back to those places. I know how us as a human animal, what we can be like, and we haven't got that far back in history to know that we could all be slipping back into some very dystopic world. So it's the push and pull. Anyway, Meg, we've been going for, I don't know how long, but it's nearly 10 to 3 in the morning. I know we sort of keep, I know
Our
we keep
usual length of time, yeah.
exactly
Yeah, I'll just say this one last thing as
go
well,
on.
and
I
I've
was
had
going to
this
say,
chat with Lee,
oh,
but
go on.
I sort of a final thought. I also think that, our kind of age group, I think if we have these certain levels of awareness compared to, say, other people. I don't mean that in an egotistical way, like we're more aware or more intelligent or anything like that. I just mean sometimes, certain people have certain levels of consciousness and awareness, and other people have lower levels of consciousness and awareness. But I think we have a responsibility as well for the future generations to try and shape society, or try and act as pioneers or guides into creating a better world. It's not a case of becoming new leaders or forcing things down people's throats or making people believe or behave in a certain way. It's just about showing people alternative ways of doing things, and ways of making the world a better place. And I think if we've got young people and future generations, we kind of have a responsibility to a certain extent to be those pioneers and help create that better world.
Exactly. I mean, and I think just generally on that one, and it's something that, for instance, I know that the Scene Dims, I went and saw them live last week, and they talk about it. It's like march forward with love, march forward with, into the light, and it's exactly that. We march forward with love, and that's the element of where we're going, and it's unstoppable, Meg. And that's the ultimate bottom line on this, and it's spoken, it's true, we're going to march. We're marching forward, and like you said, it's all we can do. Like I've said, I've as always, Meg. It's always insightful conversation. And I'm kind of like, we've got kind of flagpoles all over the place to pick up and have pick up these conversations for later down the line. And at some point as well, I know we've been talking about it for many times, but I think I look forward to the day we have a freeway between me, you, and Lee, and have a real kind of have a conversation, because that's a
Yeah,
conversation
for sure, definitely.
I'm looking forward to.
Yeah,
But
that'll probably be about a 6-hour conversation.
exactly, but
You'll have to split it into 2 shows.
exactly. But like I said, Meg, I want to thank you for giving me your time tonight. And like I said, I'm going to leave you with the final word. And like I said, I want to thank you for your time anyway. But I'm going to leave you with the final
Thanks
word.
for having me on again. It's been a pleasure.
Go on, you can have the final word. What's your final thoughts from this takeaway?
Well, yeah, one other little thing I wanted to say, because I noticed when you said, as long as we don't blow ourselves up, I do think there's a lot of, fear mongering in the mainstream media. I was saying to somebody the other day, with everything that's going on at the moment, that there's a lot of people getting very scared and fearful. And I said, look, think about this logically. If the elites set off a nuclear bomb, they can go into their bunkers. They've probably got so many years worth of caviar and champagne to last them. But think about it logically. What are they going to come out to? What are they going to come outside of their bunker to? And there's another school of thought. I mean, this is, as I said, this is another show. We could get into this in great detail. You know, there's often, and I do entertain this to a sort of some extent. I haven't done enough research on it to be completely 100% sure in either direction, but there is a potential for the whole prospect of nuclear arms not actually existing. You know, they're
Hmm.
just another fear mongering tool. And if, you know, at the moment I'm leaning towards the fact they probably do exist, but I don't think there's ever going to be a chance of any being set off at any point. I think it's been something that has been used as a fear mongering tool for years. You know, when it's kind of like when all else fails, let's bring out the nuclear bomb. You
Yeah.
know, fear threat card. You know,
Well,
that's kind
just
of their ace card. And I don't have any kind of fear about that sort of thing at all, because I just think, well, if they do exist, then the logic tells me that they wouldn't actually do anything, because
exactly.
ultimately, how are they going to exist if they kill all the minions and all the people that run the systems? How long can they exist in their bunker or whatever it is they're going to do? So what I'm saying is, I'm my final thought is that when people get fearful and scared, and obviously we're living in some weird times, and there is a lot of fear in people that I'm seeing, I try and say to people, you just need to kind of think about these things clearly. Think about them, just sort of, instead of getting carried away with all the fear mongering that you watch on the news on the mainstream. Try and sort of think about it and think, well, what's the reality? What are the odds of that really happening? Because, you know, I know a lot of, I mean, me, my environment with my kids, I don't watch a lot of I know what's going on in the news, but we're not one of these families that sit and watch TV. The kids watch films occasionally and movies, but we don't really watch the mainstream TV. We don't watch soaps or anything like that. So, yeah, but I know a lot of children are subjected to this kind of thing 24/7 because their parents are watching it, and they're sort of going to bed terrified, thinking, oh my God, all this horrible stuff's going to happen. So yeah, I just think that my final thought, I know it's taken me a long time to get around to the point, but my final thought would be that we need to kind of put things in perspective a little bit. I mean, if I was going to go even deeper and more cosmic about it, you know, whatever we think in our heads is going to be the reality
Damn right.
collectively. And this is why the elites propagate all this fear mongering, because they want to bring negativity into existence. They also want to use the fear to keep us under control, because when human beings are in a state of fear, they don't do anything. And they also, it lowers the vibrational state that they're in, the consciousness state lowers it down, so they don't become enlightened and they don't become aware, and they can't be in control of their own life. So there's a reason for why all these things happen, why they continually bombard us through the mainstream with all this negativity and things that are going to scare us and put us into a state of depression and despair, and feel like there's no point in going on and all the rest of it. You know, feel powerless. That's what it's designed to do.
Hmm.
So yeah, my final thought is to just try and put things in perspective. And if you are getting, you know, weighed down with all this negativity that's coming from the mainstream media, just switch off. Don't be caught into the trap of thinking, oh, but if I don't keep myself updated with all this stuff, then I'll be accused of being ignorant, and I have to know what's going on in the world. I can't just bury my head in the sand. It's not about burying your head in the sand. It's just giving yourself some respite from all the negativity, and
Yeah.
do something that gives you a bit of joy and a bit of happiness. You know, go to the beach with your family and don't watch the
Mm.
news. Or so we're not going to watch the news for a week. We're just going to do something that's totally unrelated to that and be frivolous and have fun. Because that then gets you into a positive mindset. And that's ultimately what will change the world. Because on a non cosmic note, if everybody has a positive mindset, their imaginations their brains will reflect the positive mindset. And the only thing that can possibly come into creation on a collective level will be good things, because people will be having good thoughts and good feelings. So, I think it's really important to do the things that make you feel good. And if switch the news off and not watch it, or not read the paper and buy into all the propaganda, do that, because that's ultimately what's going to make the most dramatic change in society. And that, our collective consciousness will reflect, the reality will reflect whatever our consciousness is. So that's what I think people should be doing.
Perfect. I can't say any better than that. Well, all the way from Scotland to all the way down in England, life is people, people.